Go ahead, Julie. You will also notice this clanking sound. That is the sound of these big interlock blades. You see that run completely up and down the column, snapping in, because when you don't want those columns to rotate, you don't want them to drift in between two numbers. So that lock comes in, locks up the column, resets all neatly, so you have integer digits on every column. And then you will see the print cycle happen. The type is going to rotate in a second. There's the rotation, print, stereotype, the tray index is in. Watch the next one come up here. There's the rotation, type, ink, print, stereotype. Now, when this tray gets to the end of the column, it's automatically programmed because it will come zipping out, rotate across, ready for the next column. Not only that, there are two of these trays in here. Babbage wanted two different sizes for the books, or two fonts, one this size and one big. In addition, what happens when this tray is full? Julie's way down here. You don't want to overflow this thing, right? So there's a little weight dropping down here, which is pulling on this piece of catgut, which comes up here, across the machine to a little pawl. When that tray fills up, it's going to shut off the machine by disconnecting the crank, freewheeling the crank. That means you've got to come down here and change this tray. We thought of all these things. Okay, now we're going to go around the back, and Julie's going to crank it some more, and we can look at one of the more mesmerizing parts of this machine. So let's go around back.
How long does it take to learn to do this?
You need to be friendly. I can't see it on the edge.
Okay, let me get out of the way. Go ahead. What the heck is going on here? It's not a DNA model. He would have really been ahead of his time if he thought of that. The biggest problem in designing calculators in the 1800s was, how do you carry? When you're inning, you go past 9 on a column starting on the right, you got to carry the 1. Those mechanisms were, believe it or not, a little difficult to design because you have to carry all the way across. I remember my odometer sticking in my car when it got to 99,999. There seemed to be not enough energy to push them all over the top. What happens in this machine is, he was very clever about managing the energy. When one of the bottom wheels, or less significant wheels, goes from 9 back to 0, a tab on the wheel energizes a little mechanism here, and it protrudes out. Then, at the right part of the cycle, that'll happen up and down the column. At the right part of the cycle, we start from the bottom with these hooks. They come around, if that thing is worn, saying, I need to be carried, the hook engages the mechanism, another mechanism, and pushes the wheel just above it by 1 digit. If that happens to go through 9 at the time, that'll be activated, and the next one will be right up the column. So if you're a computer person, we're polling the register for carries, right? And that's exactly. One more thing. You can all turn around and see this board. I think you've all got a little algebra, so I won't lose you here. How does finite differences work? Just a quick illustration of how finite differences work in solving equations. Here is a simplest I could think of. Result equals x squared plus 1. In order to program that machine, what we have to do is solve these polynomial equations manually n plus 1 times, one more than this exponent. So in this case, 3 times. I've got to do it manually. So we can do that together. If x equals 0, the result is 1. X equals 1, the result 1 squared plus 1 is 2. 2 squared is 4, plus 1 is 5, right? Now, I subtract manually. So we can do that together times, one more than this exponent. So in this case, polynomial equation x squared plus 1. In order, just a quick illustration of how finite differences work in solving equations. Here is a simplest I could think of. Result equals x squared plus 1. In order to program that machine, what we have to do is solve these polynomial equations manually n plus 1 times, one more than this exponent. So in this case, 3 times. I've got to do it manually. So we can do that together. If x equals 0, the result is 1. X equals 1, the result 1 squared plus 1 is 2. 2 squared is 4, plus 1 is 5, right? Now, I subtract the first two solutions and put the difference in difference column number 1. The next two, subtract difference column number 1. Then subtract the first two differences, put it in difference column number 2. Notice for a second order equation, I wind up with a constant in difference column 2. For a third order equation, I would wind up with a constant in 3. For a fifth order equation, I would wind up with a constant in difference column 5. I then take these numbers with some adjustment because of this polling, and we manually boot them into the machine. There's a process for us manually turning the wheels, setting them to those initial differences. From now on, we only have to add to solve for every sequential value of the unknown x. We want the 2 plus 3 equals 5, 5 plus 5 equals 10. X equals 4, 2 plus 5 is 7, 7 and 10, 17. It'll work for any polynomial equation. So, and if you look at the machine now and can read the numbers, you'll see the difference column number 5 remains a constant on the machine. All the other numbers are changing. Questions about that? Okay, so let's go back around front here. Sorry. The museum in London always voted on whether this was game-changing. In other words, is the concept of the machine wrong? Or are we just fixing something that engineer Charles Babbage and his excellent machinist would have said, well, that's obviously wrong, we got to fix that. So that's the way some of these fixes got made. Some of them were fairly large, some of them small. One of the most obvious is Charles Babbage envisioned cranking this from this big top gear, meaning that one revolution of the crank would give us one answer. Unfortunately, Julie hasn't the strength to propel the machine from there, and neither did anybody at the museum, so they put a 4-to-1 reduction gear in here. That's why we have to do 4 revolutions of the crank to get an answer. 4 revolutions of the crank, 8 seconds for 4 revolutions, if anybody wants to calculate millions of floating point operations per second from that. So there are several of those little things in the machine. The other thing I'd like to just mention before we finish is what's the impact of Charles Babbage's machines on computing history? That's why we're in business here in this museum. And there's a lot of dispute about that. Lots of books about Charles Babbage and his influence. My view is, after reading some of them, that it's not huge because, and you can relate to this, I think he was so far ahead of his time with this, and he never built the machine. So people did not build on that technology. Much later in the century, others knew that these machines could be made and kind of took off on it, but that really lessened his influence on history. However, he did have a young female protege by the name of Ada Lovelace. Ada was the daughter of Lord Byron the poet, but her mother didn't want her to be a poet and shoved her into math and science, very unusual. And she really was enamored with Babbage's ideas. Not with Babbage, by the way, but she was very enamored with his projects. And she, at one point, wrote a paper commenting on a French paper where she said, gee, I realize that these are only numbers on these machines, but that number could represent a character in the alphabet as well as it can represent a number, or it can represent a symbol. And I've envisioned that we'll be able to program these various devices to manipulate symbols, characters, and words. So there was a little vision there. But otherwise, it took way into the later part of the century for people to start building reasonably priced, smaller calculating machines, of course. So we're going to crank it once more, and then we'll be hanging around here if you guys have any questions. So you can take it all in now that you know how it works and see what's happening.
computer programmer? What if I told you that the world's first computer programmer was born over 200 years ago? And what if that programmer was a
Nemusíte rozumět složitému světu investic, abyste mohli začít investovat.
What if I told you that the world's first computer programmer was born over 200 years ago? And what if that programmer was a she? Lady Ava Lovelace was her name, and her genius was nearly lost to history. Daughter to the famous romantic poet Lord Byron, Ada was almost relegated as a footnote in her father's biography. In the 19th century, at the height of the Industrial Revolution, she was pushed into the male dominion of mathematics and science by her zealot mother. Mentored by the father of the computer, she emerged as a woman far ahead of her time in her ability to see what could potentially be. Not your typical aristocratic lady, part of Ada's story holds a shadowy secret, and on her deathbed, her last wish speaks volumes. Today on Biographics, we explore the enchantress of number, Ada Lovelace. Ada Lovelace was born Augusta Ada Byron in London on December 10, 1815, to the philandering romantic poet Lord Byron and strictly religious Annabella Milbank. Ada was Lord Byron's only legitimate child. Lord and Lady Byron were members of high British society. Beyond social status, they shared virtually nothing in common. Annabella was analytical and conformist, while Lord Byron cared little for numbers and logic. True, he was a celebrated and adored poet, yet his behaviour raised more than a few eyebrows. He was known to drink from a human skull, own a pet bear, and engage in numerous love affairs with both men and women. One notorious scandal involved an affair with his own half-sister. A scorned lover once said of Lord Byron, he was mad, bad, and dangerous to know. Not surprisingly, Annabella and Lord Byron's marriage did not last beyond a year. In a contemptuous split when Ada was only 5 weeks old, Lord Byron left the home. He wrote of this parting, "Is my face like my mother's, my fair child, Ada, sole daughter of my house and heart?" Deeply bitter and resentful, Lady Annabella covered his portrait with a large curtain and forbade Ada from ever looking at it. 4 months after Lord Byron left his infant daughter, he left England for good, never to return. When Ada was 8 years old, he died of an illness in Greece while fighting in the War of Independence. He was 36 years old. Although Ada never met her father, she remained fascinated with him and his poetry over the course of her life. Annabella was determined to steer her daughter away from developing her father's volatile poetic insanity, as she called it. She truly believed Lord Byron was mentally ill. Almost to the brink of fanaticism, Annabella saw to it that Ada received an education rigorous in mathematics and science. This was a rather unusual course of study for girls in British Victorian society, even if Annabella herself was gifted in math. Byron referred to her as the Princess of Parallelograms. Popular opinion of the time favoured one of Ada's later tutors and brilliant mathematician Augustus de Morgan, who believed women were incapable of excelling in the discipline. On the one hand, de Morgan acknowledged Ada's abilities, yet in a letter to her mother he wrote, "The very great tension of the mind which they require is beyond the strength of a woman's physical power of application." Basically what he said was that women weren't capable because they were not as strong as men. Well, Ada, she was going to prove that wrong. As a young girl and into her teen years, Ada was mostly isolated and did not spend a great deal of time with her mother. Still, Annabella was committed to her daughter's education and her well-being. She employed some of the greatest intellectual minds to tutor Ada, including William King, a physician, William Friend, a social reformer, and Mary Somerville, a Scottish astronomer, mathematician, and the first woman to be admitted to the Royal Astronomical Society. Ada and Somerville became close friends. In addition to algebra and geometry, Ada was taught lessons in history, literature, languages, geography, music, sewing, and shorthand. These were all common subject areas, but Ada's mother planned something else that was far, far more bizarre. In an effort to protect her daughter from developing her father's impulses, Ada had to lie still for long periods of time. This was a lesson in self-control. Ada was a bright student and showed promise for math and science. At the age of 12, after a long tour of Europe, she became obsessed with birds and with flight. She researched what she referred to as flyology, and imaginatively and methodically conceptualized a flying machine that could flap its wings. She wrote to her mother, "I've got a scheme to make a thing in the form of a horse with a steam engine in the inside, so contrived as to move an immense pair of wings fixed on the outside of the horse, in such a manner to carry it up into the air while a person sits on its back." For her design, she considered the type of material, paper, silk or feathers, navigational equipment, a compass, and steam the source of power. In between throwing herself into intellectual pursuits, Ada battled sickness. She frequently complained of headaches that obscured her vision. In 1829, she contracted measles, a common childhood affliction in the 1800s. The illness resulted in continuous bed rest for a year, and she was disabled temporarily. In 1831, at the age of 16, she was finally able to walk again with the aid of crutches. By the age of 17, Ada was feeling better, and in keeping with the customs of her social class, she was presented at court and became a popular belle of the season. She danced with and charmed the various attendees with her brilliant mind. The Industrial Revolution was in full force by the time Ada was a teenager. It was a glorious time in history for the advancement of technology and the perfect time for the inquisitive Ada to be coming of age. Make no mistake, she had the makings of a phenom. She had inherent abilities combined with rigorous education. She also had access to intellects, investors, and influential people in power, all because of her position in society. All of this was the perfect storm, and meeting the famed inventor Charles Babbage was Ada's lightning bolt. In 1833, the 17-year-old Ada was among a select group to attend a coveted party hosted by Babbage, known by many today as the father of the computer. A guest wrote at the time, "One of the 3 qualifications for those who sought to be invited were intellect, beauty, or rank." Ada, with those requirements, well, she fit right in. At the soiree, Babbage unveiled a small part of his latest machine, a massive mechanical calculator known as the difference engine. The design for Babbage's engine was revolutionary, and fully constructed, it would perform the work of an army of men crunching numbers. The machine would be powered by steam and would methodically perform complex calculations using only addition by breaking it into smaller and smaller pieces, known as the method of finite differences. Then it would print out the values into a table. Babbage's machine had enormous potential in the 19th century, since tables were used in many areas, including navigation, astronomy, and engineering. With this powerful calculator, human error would be erased. The engine was accurate within 31 decimal places. To many guests that night, Babbage's invention was a hunk of metal and little more than a party favor, but not to Ada. De Morgan's wife was there and later wrote of the night when most of the guests looked on with the expression that savages show on seeing a looking glass. Miss Byron, young as she was, understood its working and saw the great beauty of the invention. Babbage must have been impressed with Ada's intellect and enthusiasm for the machine. From that night on, he remains her mentor and lifelong friend.
A vital step to success in life is often a world-renowned university. Oxford Royal Academy offers you an authentic
Babbage's difference engine would not come to be after a disagreement with his engineer, Joseph Clement. In those days, by law, the engineer owned the drawings, and after their falling out, he could not get them back. Consequently, the British government also withdrew their funding for the project. This forced Babbage back to his original concept, but he came up with an even better idea in 1834, a far more complex machine that he called the analytical engine. The analytical engine is considered to be the world's very first programmable general-purpose computer. The basic structure of the engine is essentially the same as modern-day computers. Of course, Babbage's machine was massive in scale. His entry-level machines would have been 45 feet long by 15 feet high, but he talked about others that were 10 times that size. Nothing like it had ever been conceived or attempted before. In fact, in his lifetime, only a small trial engine was constructed. This analytical engine, it consisted of 4 components: the mill, which calculated units, the store, where the data was held for processing, and the reader and printer, the input and output devices. It was truly groundbreaking and would largely become Ada's legacy. Since Ada and Babbage's first meeting, she became his protege. He was the teacher, and she was the pupil. After Babbage showed her the plans for the analytical engine, she eagerly went on a tour of cotton mills in the north of England to see the most technologically advanced machine of the day, the Jacquard loom. The loom automated the weaving of patterned silk and was controlled by a series of punch cards. It was fascinating, and it was also controversial. A cotton mill with a Jacquard loom didn't need skilled workers to weave intricate patterns. While groups such as the Luddites were protesting against these machines on account of replacing workers' jobs, Ada was thinking something else entirely. She was deeply interested in the genius behind the punch cards and wanted to know how men were translating the complicated patterns into something simple. She saw the similarities to her beloved machine and later wrote, "The analytical engine weaves algebraic patterns just as the Jacquard loom weaves flowers and leaves." For the next 10 years, in between getting married and having 3 children, Ada focused all her energy into learning everything she could about the analytical engine. She wrote, "I think I am more determined than ever in my future plans, and I have quite made up my mind that nothing must be suffered to interfere with them. I intend to make such arrangements in town as will secure me a couple of hours daily, with very few exceptions, for my studies." After attending one of Babbage's rare lectures, a military engineer and future Italian Prime Minister, Luigi Menabrea, wrote an impressive article, a sketch of the analytical engine invented by Charles Babbage Esquire. The paper was extremely detailed and mathematical, and it was also written in French. Ada decided to translate the paper, and since she knew the engine so well, she could add her own thoughts to it. Many years later, Babbage claimed to have told Ada to translate it and write her own account, and she responded by saying she hadn't thought of it. Either way, she went about the task like a devil possessed, and when When she was finished, her notes were 3 times as long as the original paper. Ada published her completed article in Scientific Memoirs, an English scientific journal published by Richard Taylor in 1843. Ada only used her initials on the paper, AAL, standing for Augusta Ada Lovelace. The part of the paper that gives weight Ada's credit as first computer programmer comes in section G. In it, Ada wrote of how the engine could be programmed with a code to calculate Bernoulli numbers. This was an algorithm to be carried out by a machine and with a code to calculate comes in section G. In it, Ada wrote of how the engine could be programmed with a code to calculate Bernoulli numbers. This was an algorithm to be carried out by a machine and thus the first computer program. Along with numbers, Ada described how codes could be created for the device so it could handle letters and symbols. She also theorized a method for the engine to repeat a series of instructions, or looping, a process computer programs still used today. Ada also offered up other concepts in her paper, such as her thoughts on artificial intelligence. She wrote, "The analytical engine has no pretensions whatever to originate anything. It can do whatever we know how to order it to perform. It can follow analysis, but it has no power of anticipating any analytical relations or truths." Her notes were significant in that they captured Ada's vision for the analytical engine. And this is where she exceeds her mentor in her understanding of its full potential. Babbage's historian wrote, "Ada saw something that Babbage, in some sense, failed to see. In Babbage's world, his engines were bound by number. What Lovelace saw was that number could represent entities other than quantity. Looking back from the present high ground of modern computing, if we are looking and sifting history for that transition, then that transition was made explicitly by Ada in that 1843 paper." Babbage was impressed with Ada and wrote, "The more I read your notes, the more surprised I am, and regret not having earlier explored so rich a vein of the noblest metal." The next obvious step for the analytical engine would have been Babbage's and Ada's crowning moment, but it would not come to pass. Babbage was known to be a difficult man, and he argued with politicians over his machines. The relationship with Parliament was particularly soured after Babbage failed to deliver his government-funded difference engine. The loss of money in those days was the equivalent to 2 Royal Navy warships. Ada had a plan to promote the engine, but it was a sensitive subject, one she breached in a letter dated August 14, 1843. She asked Babbage if she could take over him for promoting the analytical engine, while he step aside and focus only on building it. She ended with, "You will wonder over this last query, but I strongly advise you not to reject it." Babbage, though, he said no, refusing all of her conditions. Babbage would not give up control, and he likely saw her asking as an audacious.
If you're trading for the flashy lifestyle, you're going to fail. The truth is, you're not going to be able to compete.
Audacious move. Depending on the lens used to evaluate Ada, she can be hailed as a genius, a Victorian high society lady, a mother and wife, a gambler, adulteress, or drug addict. In truth, she may have been all of those things. She was like most of us, complex and contradictory. As one would expect, Ada married and had children. She wed William King, not William King, who was her tutor, in 1835 at the age of 19. He was 30. King seemed to be a precise, conscientious, and decent man, if somewhat stiff. 3 years after they tied the knot, King became the Earl of Lovelace, and Ada took the title Countess of Lovelace. They had 3 children together: Byron, born May of 1836, Anne Isabella, called Annabella, born in September of 1837, and Ralph Gordon, born in July of 1839. For a time between 1835 and 1839, Ada focused most of her energy on running the large household, though she found herself time for horse riding, learning the harp, and studying mathematics. After their 3rd child was born, Ada turned her attention back to maths and the sciences and was tutored by Augustus de Morgan. Her husband King was supportive. Socially, the couple had many prominent friends and acquaintances, including the writer Charles Dickens. In addition to headaches and the measles suffered in childhood, Ada had recurrent health problems as an adult. After a bout of cholera in 1837, she had problems with asthma and her digestive system. She was prescribed a powerfully addictive painkiller, an opiate, which was to be taken with wine. The drug altered her personality, and she reported hallucinations and mood swings. In 1841, Ada and Medora Lee, the daughter of Lord Byron's half-sister, Augustus Lee, were told by Ada's mother that Lord Byron was also Medora's father. In February, Ada wrote to her mother, "I am not in the least astonished. In fact, you merely confirm what I have for years and years felt scarcely a doubt about, but should have considered it improper in me to hint to you that I in any way suspected." She did not blame the incestuous relationship on her father, but instead blamed Augusta Lee. "I fear she is more inherently wicked than he ever was." In the 1840s, Ada herself flirted with scandals, first with relaxed relationships with men who were not her husband, which led to rumors she was having affairs, and then an old family vice surfaced. Ada's life took a shadowy turn in 1851 when she began gambling on horses. Perhaps she was trying in vain to raise funds for her beloved analytical
Augustus Ada King, Countess of Lovelace.
Humans have made calculating machines for millennia. from the ancient abacus to the mysterious Antikythera mechanism. However, the history of modern computing began in the 19th century with the work of two English mathematicians. Charles Babbage was born in 1791 in London. Despite his mathematical genius, Babbage had trouble starting an academic career. Instead, he set out to standardize astronomical calculations. Back then, calculation tables were central to science. However, thanks to human error, mistakes were common. To solve this problem, Babbage conceptualized
Kup čokoládu a sušenku Milka a peníze za čokoládu budou tvoje.
could only do additions. The analytical engine was designed to perform any arithmetic operation using instructions from punched cards. Babbage thought the machine would be useful only for calculations, but another mathematician soon realized its full potential. Ada Lovelace was born in London in 1815. She was raised on science, logic, and mathematics, and became fascinated with machines. In 1842, Lovelace translated one of Babbage's seminars on the analytical engine. In the process, she added notes that were 3 times longer than the lecture. In those notes, Lovelace showed that computers could do far more than number crunching. She pointed out that the digits could represent other entities, like letters and musical notes, and she prefigured the concept of software. Lovelace also included a computer algorithm for calculating Bernoulli numbers, which are a sequence of rational numbers which occur frequently in analysis, making her the world's first programmer. Due to insufficient funding, the analytical engine was never finished during Babbage's or Lovelace's lifetime. However, their notes and designs laid the groundwork for modern computers, which underpin much of our modern progress. For these reasons, Babbage and Lovelace are our 49th Heroes of Progress.
So I thought we'd take a look at punched cards. A rather
Nová Schauma Hair Booster s kofeinem pomáhá chránit před vypadáváním vlasů. Dostupná jako šampon a tonikum.
So I thought we'd take a look at punched cards, a rather outdated concept of storing data for a computer. Now, cards like this have been in use, in the 19th century. They were used, holograph cards were used in fairground organs and the like, and other mechanical machines. But these are IBM standard style cards, which were introduced in 1928, I believe. And they started out with this 80-column span, if you like, and we have 10 rows here and then 2 value rows at the top. And early printing machines like this couldn't use all the available spaces, so they could only print one hole and a hole in the value row, so you couldn't use the entire ASCII character set. So for example, you might have this is known as row 11 up here, this is one you can't see, and this is 12. You might have a punch in row 12 and then a punch in row 1, and that would indicate the letter A, for example, or a punch in row 12, punch in row 2 for B, and so on. So you could work out, you could have what 40 combinations, which is nowhere near the full ASCII character set. And when IBM introduced upper and lowercase characters, it got a bit difficult. So better punches had to be introduced, which could punch multiple holes. And once you could start punching multiple holes in a column, then there was obviously more data. And cards like this were in use in the 70s, even in the 80s in legacy machines. And they can't hold a lot of data. I mean, they used to come in packs of 200 cards, and if you're looking at one character per column, we've got 80 columns, so we're looking at 80 characters per card. So it's not that much data. What's that? 8,000 characters per 100? Not a lot of data at all. But it's interesting to see how we've evolved from this to tape mediums and discs and CDs, and that sort of medium just blows my mind how we can do that. I still think circuitry, storage mediums like that must have been invented by some alien force or something. I mean, this is easy to understand, and this is where you need to start to pick up the principles of later storage systems, but even how discs work and stuff, it's just crazy. Absolutely boggles my mind how they spin so quickly and pick up the data. Yeah, it's interesting to look at things like this. And later on in the card's life, then binary cards were used, and binary cards allowed the punching devices could punch holes wherever across a single column. So you could use the full column's allowance, which allowed I think 2 36-bit words per column, which was a massive increase in data on the card. But by then things were getting a bit outmoded, and it was time to replace the cards anyway. But this is where we came from. This is where our data span from. There's nothing on the back except for some holes. There we go. They're nice to look at. Lovely stuff. And if they're too punched, if you look at a binary card which has got punches everywhere, then they become pretty flimsy and can often get jammed in the reading machines when they're put through. Look at that. Nice. It's like those little kids colouring things, isn't it? Colouring templates. Although nothing like it at the same time. It'd be interesting to see what came out if you coloured through a few of those. Probably gibberish. Anyway, that's punched cards. I just wanted to explore these with you. Oh, one thing I wanted to mention as well. There used to be a system where, because there wasn't enough variation in the punches to use the entire ASCII character set, there was a technique where a punch in a particular area on the card would put the system into an alternative character set, a bit like pressing Shift and using the alternative characters on your keyboard. And then this would allow the same hole after that change to register as a different character to one before it. A very problem with that is if you started reading a card halfway through, or you missed a card and subsequent readings were taken using the wrong character set, you just end up with a bunch of gibberish fed into the computer, which is not ideal. And I find this stuff really interesting. I find the history of computing and anything like this fascinating to look.
Herman Hollerith. Herman Hollerith concocted a punch card classification machine framework for measurable calculation. Herman Hollerith's incredible invention used power to peruse, count, and sort poked cards whose holes addressed information accumulated by the census takers. His machines were utilized for the 1890 public census and achieved in 1 year what might have required almost 10 years of manual arranging. Herman Hollerith. Herman Hollerith.
This is a Hollerith census machine. Herman Hollerith, the man who came up. This is a Hollerith census machine. Herman Hollerith, the man who came up with a better way of doing things, made some money, but is mostly forgotten today. What is the Hollerith machine? Well, it has to do with the American Constitution's requirement to take a census every 10 years. Starting in 1790, every 10 years, the American government has taken a census. The next one will be 2010. Everything was counted: horses, dogs, sheep, cattle, pigs, how many wagons you owned, if you were a railroad, how many engines, if you were a ship owner, how many ships you owned. Anything and everything of statistical interest for economic purposes for government planning. What you see here is an 1890 machine used in the 1890 census. A better way of focusing, calculating, organizing the information. In 1880, the American census took about 5 years to collect all the data. It took another 4.5 years to complete the census. If you hadn't had the Hollerith machine for the 1890 census, it wouldn't have been complete in 10 years. These machines revolutionized large-scale information handling. The 1890 census took about the same time as the 1880 census, even though there were 16 million more people. What did it do? It provided a more organized way and a faster way of processing information. A large data sheet would be marked. It was organized.
Good afternoon. My